Hey writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Rachel, one of Kobo Writing Life's author engagement managers.
And I'm Laura, Kobo Writing Life's other author engagement manager.
On today's episode, we chatted with internationally best-selling author Hannah Mary McKinnon. Hannah was born in the UK, grew up in Switzerland, and moved to Canada in 2010. While her debut, Time After Time, was a rom-com, she transitioned to the dark side thereafter, writing suspense novels. It's rumored that she does still have a softer side because she also writes holiday romantic comedies as Holly Cassidy, the second of which is coming out soon, and it is called The Christmas Countdown.
We had such a fun conversation with Hannah. We talked to her all about her writing journey, from her thrillers to her Christmas romances. And we also talked about her newest release, The Christmas Countdown, and really dug into that and the writing process behind it, as well as the inspiration for the book. And we also talked about how you can see parts of her Swiss heritage in the novel.
It was a really fun conversation, and we think you will enjoy. All right, we are joined today by author Hannah Mary McKinnon, who also writes as Holly Cassidy. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Now, can we start things off by you telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yes, of course. So I'm Hannah Mary McKinnon. I, as you mentioned, also write as Holly Cassidy. I live in Canada, although most people will probably tell that that's not where I'm originally from, which is very true. So I was born in the UK, but I grew up in Switzerland before moving to Canada in 2010. And now I write, and The Christmas Countdown is my latest novel, and that is novel number 10.
Wow, 10 novels. That's pretty prolific at this point. Did you always know that you wanted to be an author?
No. No, I did not. I really enjoyed writing in school. Creative writing was one of my favorite things to do in class. And I then didn't write creatively anymore because work, studies, work, the husband, kids, and there wasn't really the opportunity to write creatively except for perhaps company newsletters, which they were fun, but it's not quite the same as a novel. So it wasn't actually until we moved to Canada and I quit my corporate career and decided to try something else and do something else in my early 40s that I remembered really that I loved writing, and I always had this vague notion that maybe one day, whenever I had time, whenever that might be, in the far and distant future, that I'd write a book. And so I did, and here we are.
Wow, that's amazing to kind of uproot, relocate, and then find a whole new career.
It was actually because it was born through failure. So well, it's nice kind of, oh, wow, she just decided to quit her career and start something. And look, here we are. It wasn't quite that glamorous. What actually happened was I had this big corporate career in Switzerland where I lived. And my husband, who's Canadian, after 11 years of living in Switzerland and 3 kids, and he was a stay-at-home dad, we decided to move back for him to move back to Canada, for me to move to Canada. And I started up my own business here in HR, a different spin on HR, because I've been active in IT recruitment, and it failed. I mean, it literally crashed and burned and died a fast but painful death. And so I had to really decide what I was going to do. Was I going to go back to a corporate gig but have the same work-life imbalance potentially, which was part of the reason why we moved to Canada, so that there would be more balance for the both of us, or choose something else. And after moping around a fair amount of time, it was my lovely husband who said, if you could do anything, what would it be? And that was when I came up with this. Well, I'd love to try and write a book. And he said, look, just try. This is the moment. You're at a crossroads. You just try and see what happens, see where it takes you. And here we are.
Well, I know that you reframed it no, it was born out of failure. It wasn't this decision I made, but I also think that, that's almost more, I feel like inspiring is such a loaded word, but I feel like it's so cool that you were okay, might as well, like, this is, like your husband said, this is the moment. That's so cool.
Well, thank you. And certainly that failure of the company that crashed and burned certainly lit a fire under my backside and in my belly that still burns bright because I really, really hated that phase. Moving countries was already difficult enough. Although, having said that, I came to Canada, I speak the language, and didn't have those barriers that so many other immigrants do. And nevertheless, when you're in the situation, you don't perhaps realize the advantages that you have. So looking back on it now, I think, yeah, you're perhaps a bit self-indulgent. You could have stopped moping away, but fair time earlier. But anyway, you can't see it when you're in the thick of it. But that failure definitely gave me that drive. I'm already a very driven person, that's for sure. But that extra shove that you're gonna do this because remember how much you hated failing? Well, don't do it again.
Well, but how did you kind of go from, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try my hand at writing a novel, to becoming a published author who is releasing her 10th book? What was your publishing journey like?
Filled with more rejection or failure, if you like, and determination. So I made the classic mistake, I think now, naive perhaps, also with a slight bit of arrogance, of thinking, well, I've read a ton of books. I'm sure I can write one. How hard can it be? Quite hard, as it turns out. And so what I did, though, was I had this idea for a book. My first novel was a romantic comedy called Time After Time. And so I wrote it very, very quickly because the idea was pretty clear. And I sent it to my mum, who said it was great. And then I sent it to a bunch of agents and they said it wasn't. Perhaps not so great after all. So some didn't say anything. Some said outright no. And some were more, I don't want to say gracious, but more detailed in their feedback, saying that, look, we like the premise, but the execution was flawed. And I thought, well, I can work with that. If everybody said the idea was terrible, I'd have to abandon the idea completely. But people like the idea, so I'm going to work on that. And that was the point where I actually took some writing courses and joined critique groups, which is probably what I should have done before. But having said that, if I'd known how long it might take, because it took a couple of years to find an agent, I might not have continued. I might have been discouraged. And so really, every rejection that I had encouraged me in a weird way, in a weird perverse way, maybe, to pursue this more, kind of like they rejected me, but I'll show them, I'm going to get published. I'm going to do it. I am. And so I remember one of my creative writing instructors saying, to get published, you really need three things. You need a decent manuscript, you need perseverance, and you need luck. And most of the time, 2 out of the 3 will do. So I had a okay manuscript, I think, certainly at the beginning. I had luck, and I also was very, I had a lot of perseverance. I just kept going. I just wouldn't take no for an answer. Not in the sense that, look, this is the manuscript, I don't need to rework it, it's perfect the way it is. Absolutely not. I must have edited that manuscript, I don't know how many times, dozens of times before it actually got picked up. But it really was the determination, and then finding an agent. I was in the right place at the right time. I was at a workshop about getting published, and I happened to ask the agent if I should query agents in the UK, in Canada, or in the States, because of my UK connections. That was part of the question, but also because Time After Time was set in England and partially in Canada at the time. We then moved it to Chicago. And he asked me if the book was funny, and I said, well, I think so. If you like my sense of humor, yes. And he offered to read it once I was done. And that was how I found my first agent, because I then worked with his assistant, who became a fully fledged agent in her own right. So it really was, I got lucky. With that part.
I'm so curious, because you mentioned that your first manuscript was a romance, but you also write thrillers as well. And I'm curious kind of what motivated that I don't know, experimenting in another genre, which led to published thrillers?
That's a great question, and it's kind of an interesting one because when I was a teenager, I used to read thrillers all the time. My mum was my book dealer. She would feed me her books and give me her books, and she would staple the sexy pages together as a joke, which was quite hilarious, actually. And on one of them, anybody who does not like books being hurt and damaged, stop listening right now, and then tune out for 10 seconds. But she would staple the pages together and write on them, "For your eyes only when you're 18" or whatever, as a joke. And of course, she had a great sense of humor. Of course, which pages did I read first? The sexy ones, obviously. I mean, it's just asking for trouble, isn't it? And so I used to read a lot of crime fiction, Jonathan Kellerman and Stephen King, the horror or the crime, equally so. But then in my early 20s, my best friend was murdered, and it was very violent, horrific, and tragic circumstances. And for a very, very, very long time, decades even, I could not read crime anymore because of this experience. I could not bear to read about somebody doing something horrible to somebody else. I just could not read that. And so I read an awful lot of rom-coms because they were safe. With a rom-com, you get happily ever after at the end. You know this, you're safe, so it's fine. With a thriller, not necessarily, especially if you read mine, as it turns out. And so I'd written time after time. I'd started to write what became my first suspense novel, The Neighbours. And I immediately felt that this book was darker and grittier, and not everybody was going to make it out unscathed. And I thought that was really interesting. And I wondered, okay, am I ready to write about this, and how dark am I going to go? And is this even a thriller? And what is it? I wasn't really sure. And I happened to be at the library waiting for one of my kids, and I saw a book called Creep by Jennifer Hillier on the bookshelf. And it's this grey cover with the words creep in big, shiny red letters and a pair of handcuffs dangling down. And I was immediately intrigued. I picked it up, read the back cover copy, sat down, started reading it, checked it out, took it home, gobbled it up, read the sequel, Freak, and then The Butcher as well. That was book 3, it's a standalone, The Butcher. And loved them all. And it was really Jenny's writing that almost, I can't say gave me permission in that sense, but opened up that door again in my mind and reminded me of my deep love of thrillers. And I was just ready, and I was ready to write something dark. And I realized, okay, so people are going to die in this manuscript. That's what's going to happen, and I'm actually okay with that. And funnily enough, I met Jenny at BoucherCon, the murder mystery writers convention in 2017. It was in Toronto. And I'm moving down the escalator and I see Jennifer Hillier, my idol, standing there with two other people. And I walked up to her and hovered until I caught her eye. And then I had this total fangirl moment. I mean, embarrassing, high-pitched voice, probably some flappy arms going on. Oh, Jennifer, I read your books and you inspired me and all that. And she was so kind. She was so lovely. And she asked me where I lived. I mentioned the town. She said, oh my goodness, I live there too. Let's meet up. Let's do coffee. And I died. Effectively, you're talking to a hologram. No, I was so shocked and so surprised. And now she's one of my closest friends. So it was lovely. And all that because I happened to find the right book at the right time at the library. How about that?
I love that story. And it's one of those things that me and Rachel talk about with authors a lot is how great the author community is and how welcoming and friendly everyone is. So it's so
really
nice
is.
that
was one of my biggest surprises. And I think I'd already had a glimpse of that before I got to BoucherCon, because I'd asked Kimberly Bell and Mary Kubica if they would blurb, with the help of my editor, of course, if they would blurb, that means not endorse, but give a quote, a book cover quote for The Neighbours. And they said yes. This debut crime author that didn't know me from anywhere. And they both said yes. And I met them at BoucherCon. And they introduced me to other crime authors who introduced me to other crime authors. And it didn't seem to matter that my book hadn't even come out yet. It was just, what are you working on? And I have a book coming. Oh, what's it about? And they're so enthusiastic and lovely. And I came away with that conference going in barely knowing, never having met really in person any of the authors. And I'd met my agent and my editor in person, and that was it. And coming home with a bunch of friends. And going a step further, I asked them if they would like an advanced reader copy of The Neighbours. I think there were 12 women. They all said yes. And without asking them, without even mentioning it, they all sent me back a quote that I could use then, or that we could use either on the cover or within the first few pages for The Neighbours. And that was just extraordinary. It was unexpected. And ever since, I've been trying to pay it forward. That's part of what the community is all about.
I love that. That's so great. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your writing process. What is your writing process like? Are you a plotter? Are you a pantser? And would you say this kind of changes depending on what genre you're writing?
I am an outliner. I am a plotter through and through. And that is simply because it works for me, that there are so many different ways. There's probably a different way of writing a book, as many different ways as there are authors, really. But I happen to be in the plotting camp because it gives me structure. So in the corporate job that I mentioned before, I had a lot of structure. I had a lot of deadlines. I had a lot of projects to manage. And breaking those projects down into smaller, digestible steps was a way for me to be able to accomplish those tasks or projects in the time that had been allocated. So, for example, during one board meeting, we decided that we'd open a subsidiary in Germany, and everybody's head turned to me and like, "You're going to do that, Hannah? Sure, okay." I have no clue how, what exactly what's involved, but I'll figure it out. Absolutely. And I found people who could help me, which is a little bit like researching for a book, just, without the murder part. And so plotting allows me to be very, very structured. And especially writing either one or two books a year, I feel that I need an outline. Without an outline, I'll just meander around, not really knowing where I'm going. And I feel I don't really have time to do that I'd waste a lot of time trying to figure out where I'm going. So I do spend a lot of time at the beginning thinking about the book. I'll start with a beginning and an end. I'll expand those 2 points into the major plot points or pinch points. I'll expand those a little bit further. Then I'll write an outline, a chapter by chapter outline. Could be a couple of paragraphs, could be a little bit more. I'll Google hairstyles mainly for characters. I don't use celebrities. I find that really distracting. I'll interview my main characters as well and create their backstory to figure out how they became who they are when we meet them in chapter one, certainly the protagonist and then the antagonist for sure. Generally a couple of main characters I do this for. And it's I might build a map, if I have a story I'm working on now is set in Portland in Maine. So I went old school and printed from Google Maps Portland and figured out where people live and how far it is to get somewhere. So I don't have to do that as I'm writing because it'll slow me down. And it's only once I've done all of that I will write my very first basic skeleton draft. And I won't call it. It does not deserve to be called a first draft because it's terrible. It's very loose. It's, a quick and dirty thing that I write for me mainly. But that's then what I will build on layer by layer by layer, probably go over it, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 times before I send it to my editor. And that's when it's called the first draft and not before. So it's a very, very structured approach.
I'm so curious about this interviewing your characters and what that looks like. And kind of on top of that, I assume this is to help you, or like you mentioned, it's to build out the backstory. And do you ever find yourself like coming up with this amazing backstory for a character and then realizing you don't have room for all of it in the novel and being bummed about it?
Well, that's almost the point. I mean, not the being bummed about it part, but it allows me to really get to know the characters. Although I'll get to know them even more as I write them, of course. You know, by the time I've edited this 90,000 word document, then I really get to know them. But the backstory serves for me to get to know them. It serves for the characters to not all be the same. You know, oh, they all went to the same university, unless that's part of the plot, of course. They don't have the same upbringing. You know, some are rich, some are poor, privileged or not, whatever it might be. Speak different languages potentially, or whatever it is. So that's really the purpose that it serves. And although it doesn't by far all get into the book, and nor should it, because it would be way too much, it does allow me to make the characters hopefully as real as possible to the reader, because they feel real to me. I feel like I really know these people, that if, to the point where if they walked into the office, I'd be a little surprised because they got into my house. But I wouldn't be, because they seem so real, which is such a bizarre thing to say. But as an author, I honestly, it isn't really that bizarre. And in terms of what the interview sheet looks like, there's the standard thing, you know, what do they look like? How old are they? That kind of thing. But then there's also questions about their finances. You know, when were they their richest, their poorest? If they inherited 10 grand, what would they do with it? What kind of a car do they drive? What kind of a car would they like to be? Have they ever seen a dead body? Do they believe in ghosts? Are they religious or not? And all of this informs me about the character, and really helps me make sure, as I mentioned, that they're not the same. So all of that cannot go into the book. And one of the questions that I really like is, where's the character at the beginning of the story, geographically and emotionally? Where are they at the end? And that can shift, you know, that, as I'm writing it, because I might come up with a better ending. And another great question is, why am I interested in this character? And why should the reader be interested in this character? So I'm always thinking about the reader, you know, yes, okay, I'm geeking out over this character, sure, but will the reader too? Will they like them? Is the purpose for the reader to actually like them, or hate them, or love to hate them, which could happen too.
I love this so much. And Laura and I have interviewed quite a few authors, and I've never heard of this like interview technique. I'm so fascinated by it. I love it.
Well, let me tell you about an even more interesting one that I don't do. Karen Hamilton, who wrote The Perfect Girlfriend, among other brilliant books, told me once that she goes to see a psychologist in character. In character. And I thought that was such a brilliant thing to do. And she said there was one time, or a couple of times, where she has to break character and say, you do understand that this isn't me. I would never do these things. This is you're interviewing me, and I'm pretending to be my character. I thought that was such a fascinating thing to do. And I believe it's a psychologist or psychiatrist in London who offers this service. And I always said I really should do that, but I'm slightly scared, because I often write from the villain's perspective. And yeah, I'd have to break character very frequently too.
I was going to say, you definitely need a disclaimer up at the top. Like,
Yes.
Especially if you're going in as the villain, like, I promise this is not me. I do not have these thoughts.
Exactly.
Please don't arrest me. One of the things that I wanted to touch on too was your pen names, because you write under Hannah Mary McKinnon, but you also write holiday romance under Holly Cassidy. Did you always know that you wanted to do two different pen names, or how did that decision come about?
So when I started writing the holiday rom-com, it was almost serendipitous, because cast your minds back to 2020, beginning of COVID lockdowns, or in the midst of the first COVID lockdowns, no vaccines, lots and lots of fear, lots of people dying. And throw in there that I was living in Canada, my parents were in Switzerland, and my mum passed away. and I could not get to Switzerland because I couldn't fly. There were flight restrictions, and yeah, I could have flown, I guess, and gone on a plane, but the travel insurance said, well, if you get COVID, you're not covered. If you break a leg, you're not covered. If you have a heart attack and die, you're not covered. Nothing's covered. So after terrible debates with myself, I decided not to go, and my family was very understanding of that. And so I remember writing during that period, Never Coming Home, which is a thriller about a man who hires a hitman on the dark web to kill his very, very wealthy but equally annoying wife. And it's a very tongue-in-cheek book. On the back of the book, it says "Missing Wife, Happy Life," and that sets the tone for the novel. It's not supposed to be taken seriously. It's a thriller, yes, but it's very dark humor. And every day I would disappear into this book and have a laugh. And it really, that character, Lucas, really saved me. It saved my sanity. And as I was writing it, I remember thinking how fun it was to write something a tad lighter, and how fun it could be to write something like a rom-com again. And I had a couple of ideas, and I saw Maggie Knox, Karma Brown, and Marissa Stapley, who had The Holiday Swap come out, or announced that it was coming out. And I remember thinking that that would be so much fun. And I played around with a couple of ideas and wrote them down, but then didn't do anything with them because inertia, sometimes is easier because, would I tell my agent? Would I write it first and then try and sell it? What if it didn't sold? Blah, blah, blah. So I did nothing. And fast forward about 18 months, my agent calls me out of the blue and she says, have you ever thought of writing a holiday rom-com? And I said, oh my gosh, yes. And here are some ideas. It was so serendipitous. It was so funny. And as we were talking about the process, that was when we started talking about pen names. Should there be a pseudonym? Should I write as Hannah Mary McKinnon? But if somebody picks up a Hannah Mary McKinnon book, although the cover should give it away that it's not a thriller, they're expecting a thriller and they find a pile of, they find a lot of romance. Or conversely, perhaps even worse, somebody picks up a Hannah Mary McKinnon thriller thinking it's a rom-com, and on page one people die. How's that going to work? So we decided on a pen name, Holly Cassidy, and Holly because that's very festive, very reminiscent of Christmas, and Cassidy means curly haired. You listeners can't see my hair, but it's very, very curly, and HC is Happy Christmas, so it kind of all tied in together. So that was why we ended up with a pseudonym.
I love hearing the background behind the name too and how it fits. It's very, very fitting for a holiday romance. So can you tell us a little bit about your latest release, The Christmas Countdown?
Yes, I'd love to. So The Christmas Countdown is a Holly Cassidy book. No dead bodies in here. Look, Ma, no murder. So it's the second one, and it's about a rejected, jilted, down in the dumps young lady called Callie, whose boyfriend of 10 years unceremoniously dumped her after they moved to a different city. So she's rather unhappy still, although it's 7 months later. And her sister Anita tries to get her back out of her shell by giving her a very special task and treats advent calendar. So every day there's either a task or a treat for Callie to receive or complete. And of course, the treats always tie in with the tasks and add in, well, a large dollop of Christmas cheer and a very sexy baker and perhaps half a dozen or so puns. And you've got yourself a Christmas rom-com as Callie rediscovers her zest for life, love, and of course, Christmas.
Now, I absolutely loved the Advent calendar idea that kind of drives the story of this book. Like you mentioned, a treat one day, a task the next. And I'm so curious where this idea came from, what the inspiration was.
So that is actually something, the Advent calendar was something I used to do first for my husband and then for my kids, not in the way that Anita builds she really levels up the calendar, it has to be said. The ones I used to make, I'd siphon off Halloween, the mini Halloween candy treats, the mini Mars bars, the mini Twix or whatever. And I had 24, I still have it actually downstairs in the basement, 24 little paper bags that I would string up on the banister with ribbon. And I'd pop a little chocolate treat in each one with a note. So for the boys, for the lads, I have three sons, it would be, the tasks would be things like empty the dishwasher or lay the table or help mum make dinner or something, go and shovel the driveway if it snowed. I could quickly change the task. It always had to be something that they had to do. It could be something like pay a compliment to at least one person today. Those kinds of things, helping out, really. That was the whole point. Whereas the treats were not material things, but things they could receive, such as get mum to make you a hot chocolate with marshmallows, or read two bedtime stories with dad. Or one of the firm favorites was, I saw this the other day because I still have them, was get mum to blow dry your hair. Because when they were little, they used to love me blow, because it's cozy and comfy, right? Or stay up 15 minutes later, those kinds of things. So every day we'd alternate. So that was where the idea for the Advent calendar came from. And in the first Holly Cassidy book, The Christmas Wager, right at the end, Bella, the protagonist, makes one of these calendars for her boyfriend. And I remember writing it, laughing because it was based on something I used to do, and thinking, oh, wait a second, that might be a really cool idea for book 2. Not that the books are related, not at all. It was just something I used as inspiration for the Christmas countdown.
Are you at all worried that your family is going to read this book, see the level of Advent calendar that Anita has put together, and expect you to do another one for them?
I have to say, I never thought of that, and now I am. Yes, is my answer.
So sorry to have put that out there.
That's okay.
Now, like you mentioned, the Advent calendar in this book is a little bit different than what you used to make. And it kind of calls back to a lot of the sibling or the sisters, like family traditions that they used to have growing up. And I'm curious how much of the tradition that's in the book comes from your personal experience. And also a follow-up, when it comes to the holidays, are you more of a Callie at the beginning of the book or a Callie at the end of the book? No spoilers.
Oh, definitely a Callie at the end of the book. Absolutely. Yes. No spoilers. We won't say why, but absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And in terms of the traditions in the book, there are a couple. I mean, the calendars is definitely one. Making cookies is definitely another. We bake. That's true. What's more, really more of me in the book is everything pertaining to Switzerland, because that's where I spent 35 years. That's where I grew up. And so it was really fun to be able to add more of my heritage. And I had a little sprinkling of Switzerland in there in the first draft, and my editors said, "Oh, could you perhaps add more? Could you add more Swiss stuff, because this is different. This is really fun." And so I did, and I really enjoyed that. I have Marco working in Interlaken and Callie's father being from there, and that's where I live. That's where I grew up. And it was lovely to be able to put that stuff in. But there were some other traditions in the book that made me laugh. There was one with Marco where the love interest, where Marco's mother would hang a pickle ornament on the tree, and him and his brother would rush into the house every day because whoever found the ornament got a treat. And one year they toppled the tree. And that was completely made up. But I could absolutely see that happening, because with 3 boys in the house, if I had done that tradition, I bet the tree would have been toppled most days. So I made that one up, but it made me laugh.
I love a good pickle on the tree moment, though, as my family also had a pickle ornament. There was no fighting around the pickle ornament, although I have heard stories from friends about that, but I do love a pickle moment.
I'm going to have to get one because we don't have one yet. So that's going to be my quest for this holiday season, I think.
One of the things I liked about the book too was kind of the sister relationship between Callie and Anita. What was it like creating their dynamic?
It was really fun because I needed them to be quite different. but still get along really well, but still have the sibling rivalry that siblings have. Because I often think nobody, especially at that age, nobody can annoy you as quickly as your sibling, perhaps. Nobody knows which buttons to push and how fast they can get away with pushing them than your siblings, because they know you so well. So it was really fun to have Callie as an accountant. That's her job. Spoiler alert: I'm a trained accountant. That was my first job. And then I thought, okay, I needed to have something really, really different, really adventurous. And so she immediately became a roller coaster designer, which sounds awesome. I'd love to do that as my next job, please. That would be really fun. So it was really. Really fun to have these two characters and figure out, well, Callie is quite, I don't want to call her boring. She's not boring, but she's steady Eddie. She thinks about things 3 or 5 times before she acts, whereas Anita is a bit more of a bull in a china shop, as it were. She'll just, okay, let's do it. She's a lot more spontaneous in that sense, and she has seen Callie withdraw after her ex left her so far back into her shell, and she really, really wants to bring her back out. But perhaps she goes a little bit too far at times and tries to push her a little bit too far. She thinks she knows what's good for Callie, but perhaps she doesn't always. So there's that push-pull dynamic as well that was really interesting to create. I love the dynamic between them. I have an older sister, so I could draw on that too.
It's so funny you bring up Anita's job, because that was my next question, because I also would love to be a roller coaster engineer. As somebody who still has Roller Coaster Tycoon installed on their computer, I was just so curious as to where that came about, and you answered it, but I needed to mention that did stick out to me as something that was so cool.
Sounds like such a cool job, honestly. I'd have to be an engineer, and I don't think I can manage the algebra as well as I should.
Yeah, I'm terrible at math, so never actually a career path, but dream job.
Exactly.
One other thing I really wanted to ask you about this book, which I touched on before we started recording, were the puns. Because as somebody who loves puns and loves a cheesy joke, much to my entire team's chagrin, I absolutely loved it. And I'm so curious what it was like coming up with all of these puntastic lines throughout the book.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you liked them, as did I, because I love puns too, and terrible jokes, dad jokes, mom jokes. It's just I just like these one-liners. They just make me laugh. And as I was developing them, and when I came across one, I'd read them out to my family, and I cannot tell you how many times they just groaned and said, "Mom, no, you can't put that in." Yes, I can, and I will. And so especially the puns about eggnog, because Marco becomes eggnog man, and Callie is Swiss Miss. They were really fun. They were really funny, and I found myself rereading the manuscript. I think one of the last rounds of edits, the final one, the advanced reader copy, and I still giggled. So yeah, that's about representative of my sense of humor, I think.
Well, and I think what a lot of people don't understand when it comes to those of us who love puns and dad jokes, if you will, is that the louder the groan, the more successful we think we are.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yes. And secretly, people probably like them anyway. I hope. Well, that's maybe an illusion, and I'll just stick with that.
As a romance writer, are you also a romance reader as well? And do you have any favorite tropes?
Yes, I'm definitely a romance reader. I tend to read quite widely, different genres. I'm not just romantic comedies and thrillers, but historical fiction and the odd sci-fi and the odd fantasy too. And in terms of tropes, I really like enemies to lovers. I think that's a really fun one. That was the Christmas Wager. And in the Christmas Countdown, it's friends to lovers, which I actually found a little bit trickier to write, because I'm thinking, these two characters, they're both single. What's the problem? Why can't you just be together. So I had to put myself back into that frame of mind. I've been married for a long time, of what it's like and the trepidation when you're dating again, and when you like somebody and you're not quite sure if it's going to be reciprocated, and you don't want to have a friendship and you don't want to ruin it by saying, oh, I like you, so that was quite interesting. But that's definitely, Enemies to Lovers is definitely one of my favorites. There's a lot of room for a lot of banter in that one, and writing dialogue is one of my favorite things about the whole writing process, and especially the drafting process. And there's always so much scope for zingers in there, and the realization that, oh, I'm toying with this person, and not insulting them. I don't want to be that rude, but I kind of like them, and I don't know what to do with that. So that's a fun trope I do enjoy.
Also a huge fan of the enemies to lovers. I think that's also my favorite because, like you said, the banter is always top notch.
Yes.
I'm really curious, as somebody who writes across two very different genres, crime, thriller, scary, cute holiday romance, are you able to contain ideas for both genres in your brain as like at once, or do they exist in two very separate parts of your brain? Like, can you be working on a thriller and then be like, you know what? Something just sparked an idea for a holiday rom-com, or vice versa?
So it's funny because I'm never exclusively working on one project with the deadlines that I have, and the amount of books that I write. For example, I was plotting last week, I was outlining a thriller, not next year's, but hopefully the one after, and editing the thriller for next year, and thinking about a potential rom-com thereafter, not doing anything with it, just in the back of my brain. And that's such a great question, because I thought of one idea for a thriller and I thought that's kind of cool because I could go either way with this one. This could be a romantic comedy, or if I do this, it's obviously a thriller. Which one will I choose? It's almost like a choose your own adventure. Which path am I going to follow? So typically I'd say the ideas are very clearly one or the other. Although this one could go either way, and you could end up with a similar idea really, but two very different books in very different genres. Most of the time they're quite distinct.
Any thoughts of combining the two and doing a romantic thriller?
I mean, some of my thrillers have a romantic element in them. The Neighbours in particular, there was definitely a romantic element in that suspense. In Sister Dear, there's a love interest too. So I wouldn't say that my thrillers don't have any romance in them. It's just not the main theme of the book. Whereas with a romantic comedy, it's the romance. That's what people are there for. Whereas in a thriller, it's more the crime aspect, and the romance part is secondary. So a sprinkling, yes, but I don't think a full-on romantic thriller. I'm not sure. At least I haven't had. I'll never say never, but I don't have an idea for one yet. But who knows? Maybe tomorrow something will spark.
Maybe we'll get the holiday crime thriller romance that we've all been missing.
Maybe.
And that somehow it will involve like a pickle ornament or
Yes.
something.
Got to have the pickle ornament. I should maybe start putting a pickle ornament in every rom-com or book that I write.
Like a little Easter egg. So we've kept you for a while, but can you tell our listeners what you're working on next?
Yes, with pleasure. So currently editing the thriller for next year, which is tentatively called A Killer Motive. And it's about a podcaster, Stella, who took her brother, busted him out of being grounded from a parent's house, took him to a beach party 6 years prior, but he disappeared. He just vanished without a trace. 6 years later, she's a podcast host. She appears on the radio to promote her show. And during the conversation, she says that if she ever had any shred of evidence, a hint of a clue that her brother something terrible had happened to her brother, that somebody had taken him, she would solve that mystery. She would go to the ends of the earth, in fact, to bring him home and to bring or to get to bring the abductor, the killer, to justice. And the next day she gets an email from said abductor with the challenge of, instead of working a cold case, that she, well, works this brand new one, this warmer one, shall we say, of her missing brother. So
that's a good teaser.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds like such a good listen. And also how I would react should, God forbid, anything happen to my younger sister. I would be on that so fast, sleuthing away.
Yes, absolutely.
And as we wrap up here, where can our listeners find you online?
So my website is hannahmarymckinnon.com. There's a link to hollycassidyauthor.com, but you can also go straight to hollycassidyauthor.com. On social media, I am Hannah Mary McKinnon on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm on Threads, and I'm also on TikTok. So that's where I'll be. So come find me. I love hearing from readers. That's always a really big treat.
We will definitely include links to all of those, as well as to the Christmas countdown, in our show notes. And Hannah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Laura. This has been absolutely wonderful. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in picking up Hannah's books, we will include links in our show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at kobowritinglife.com. Be sure to follow us on social media. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook and Twitter, and at kobo.writing.life on Instagram.
This episode was hosted by Rachel Wharton and Laura Granger, with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham. Our theme music is composed by Tearjerker. And a huge thanks to Hannah Mary McKinnon for being our guest today. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.